So it's time for episode 2 of All My Modular, where I go over everything I'm using in my rack. Part 1 was utilities, a little bit more dry material for those of you who want the juicy stuff. This is part 2, oscillators. And I think this is probably going to be a pretty long video. I've got, I think, 12 oscillators I'm going to go over. If I can figure out how to do chapters, I will do that. I'm sure I can figure it out. So this is sort of an order of from simpler oscillators to the more complex. Might jump around a little bit. And this first oscillator is actually one I just took out of my rack, but I had already written up my thoughts on it, so I thought I'd cover it here. It served me well. It's the Dreadbox Hysteria Performance VCO. This might have been my very first oscillator I bought when I started Modular. And I bought it because it was inexpensive. I was still trying to figure out if I was going to put a lot of money into this. But it also seemed to have some interesting functions, and picked it up for about $100. And it's been in a lot of my early videos. I used it a lot. It sort of fell out of favor with me because I was having some technical difficulties with it. It's after going through the calibration process to get the tuning set up, I found it really frustrating to get through that process. And since I did that, it's never sort of been the same. But it's okay if I want to limit a melody to like within a 1 octave range, or an octave and a half, or I might use it for a bass drum. But it's taking up a little bit too much room for how little I'm actually using it musically. So that just came out. It came out of my rack. Another issue I had with it, and I don't know if I'm the only person who's had this issue because I've seen other people with this oscillator, but the silk screen is rubbed off the front of the module. You can barely see any of the line markings or the text anymore. I do know this was the version 1 of this oscillator, and a lot of the technical difficulties, internally at least, have been addressed. I don't know about the silk screen thing. The next oscillator I'm going to talk about is another very early one that I purchased from a company called Noise Reap. This is the Paradox Dual Intermodulating VCO. This is a version 1 which has been discontinued, and version 2 updates a little bit. The control allows pulse width modulation, which version 1 didn't. It's a perfectly fine oscillator. It's inexpensive. I like the way you can use one oscillator to modulate the other. It's got a hard sync. It's got self-modulation, all in a very compact footprint. So that was a pretty easy choice for me when I was still budget conscious and space conscious for building my first case. I use this mostly for the hard sync sounds, or just as a way to sort of beef up a melody if you need a couple more sound sources playing along. So it doesn't really take front and center in any of my patches, but it's still got use for a lot of what I do. The next oscillator I've got up is the Synths black Wavetable VCO. I like the idea of a Wavetable oscillator, but I think that this oscillator has a lot of areas that are sort of lacking. There's very limited selection in the different wavetables. I think there are 16 of them. It doesn't accept negative control voltage for the pitch. There's no FM input. It's just, it doesn't do enough in my book. I mainly use it, and the only reason I haven't gotten rid of it yet is I haven't decided what I might replace it with. Maybe an Osiris. That looks nice. It's the same width, so it'll fit right where I've got this one. But I do use it mainly in the very low frequency range, but a high frequency content area of the wavetable. It gives this sort of weird metallic croaky sounds, and why not? I like weird metallic croaky sounds. This next oscillator is the Make Noise tELHARMONIC. It's billed as an additive synthesis module, and I think it does quite a bit more than additive synthesis. In fact, I find I'm not sure if this is correct, but I don't know if there are any other modules that use the same modes of synthesis that this one has. But it's got a very interesting noise mode that you can get sort of interesting tuned clusters of noise that I haven't heard in anything else. And there's something called a phase modulation synthesis mode, which gives some very nice, rich, bright sounds. Not maybe as much variation as I would like in some of those modes, but all in all, they're sounds I haven't heard elsewhere, so they're fun to stick in a mix. The one drawback I would say is that it is kind of difficult to tune. There's no fine tune on it, and the coarse tune is a bit finicky. This module's been discontinued, which is kind of a shame. It's if you don't have an original, I don't know if there are any clones or anything. So these modes of synthesis, you have to track down one of these used, which is what I did. Next module is the WMD Fracture. I thought they went out of business, and I just heard a rumor that maybe they didn't, or they're coming back. So I have no idea what the availability is of this or any of their other modules. I got this kind of early on, and I wanted sort of a offbeat percussion module. And so this is sort of a sampler in a way. It has 16 different offbeat percussion sounds. I think they do have a couple standard ones, like they'll have hand claps, which is, I guess, the function that this module often serves in a mix. They've got one crazy one, ping pong balls or something, and there's an interesting way they process it internally to give you multiple copies of the signal distributed by frequency in different ways, so you can really kind of shape the sound, and all of that's CVable, so you can really go crazy if you've got enough control to go into it. The only thing, I guess, if I had to nitpick on this module, there's two outputs for it. There's what's called a tick output, and there's a standard output. And the idea is either you get one individual sample or you get the clustered collection of samples that you would get, like to define a bunch of hand claps or whatever. And the tick output is often what I'm interested in, but the level coming out of the unit is very low, especially in comparison to the clustered output, which kind of makes sense, but the end result is that the level is very low and sometimes hard to use in the mix without finding something external to like boost it. The next oscillator is the Michigan Synth Works Beehive, which is a micro Platts, if you know Mutable Instruments Platts module. For a long time I resisted getting a Platts, and I'm a huge Mutable Instruments fan. It felt to me like the kind of preset-y. I don't know why, it just wasn't appealing to me at the time. I wanted something a little more organic, and that didn't really fit the bill. But I always kind of was glancing a bit at it because everyone just, talked this up like crazily. This is the greatest oscillator in the world. So I eventually, when the new firmware came out and people were talking about that, where they sort of added a whole nother bank of modes, I started listening to some demos of things people were exploring, and I said, okay, I'll pick one up, and of course Mutable Instruments had gone out of business by the time I was ready, which was fine. I like the small form factor, and I don't mind paying a little bit less because I know it's not going to be a big focus of what I'm doing. It's nice to have there, and it's given me some nice sounds. Next I have the Joranalogue Generate 3, which is billed as a through zero multiphonic signal generator. It's like all Joranalogue stuff. It's very, it all feels very precise and analytical, and I really like this oscillator, but I sometimes realize I'm not using it all that much. I like the idea, but I always feel like I need a lot of external help to make it sing, which is fine, I suppose. I mean, the idea of mixing the odd and even harmonics together in different amounts, and you can modulate them independently, that sounds great. But everything always just feels so bright to me because there's no way to define a curve for the fall off of the harmonics. So of course we're doing a lot of filtering and otherwise shaping, and it just feels like a lot of work sometimes. But it's really great in LFO mode, especially with the sync. I love it's got hard sync and soft sync, and you can use those rhythmically to go through a strange, ever-changing waveform used as an LFO. It's some fun stuff if you play around with it. So yes, big plus on hard and soft sync, and for all the tons of control, and all through zero. Everything on this is through zero, so that's it's very nice. Okay, I'm going to try to pronounce this correctly in one take. This is the Noise Engineering Basimilus Iteritas Alter digital drum synthesizer. So this actual module has been discontinued, but it's been replaced by, what is it, Basimilus Iteritas Alia, which is one of these sort of swappable firmware type ideas, which is fantastic. This is one of those modules that everybody loves, and I'm one of them. I'm a big fan. I don't have anything bad to say about it. It's just, it's so unique in many ways, and it's really not just a percussion module. You can do bass lines with it. You can do interesting, indescribable things with enough good modulation, and it's great. It has a reputation of being really great for techno music, and I don't do techno music, or I don't get too close to that in my style, but I find it useful in ambient soundscapes, in anything at all. There's a place for it, and you should buy one. Next is the Mutable Instruments Rings, which of course has been discontinued, but there are plenty of clones out there. This is not just an oscillator, it's also a resonator. That's supposedly its main function, is to use as a resonator, but I think people like to use the plucky string sounds, and it's gotten this reputation of being too much just for that sound. And there's so much more it can do in both modes. But in oscillator mode, I've gotten some very strange burping rubber robot sounds. I mean, it's very versatile. One thing I really like to do when it's in resonator mode is to use it with the Fracture module, which I just talked about. It gives me little bursts of sounds that are used in rings to excite the resonator, and in a way it's sort of a mutant version of Mutable Instruments elements. Of course, not nearly as complex and well integrated, but there's some interesting things you can do by plucking the resonator with something other than just a spike of noise, using something a little bit more organic. Next is the Bastl Instruments Pizza, which is an FM and wave shape oscillator. And as soon as I saw the early demos of this before it was available, I knew I had to own this oscillator. And boy, am I glad I picked one up when I did. It's so fun. It's got so many sweet spots. This idea of using sort of internally controlled FM to keep things more harmonic just gives this richness, interesting things you can do. Wave shape internally, and it's just got this gooey, glorious sound, and I use it in everything. This is a star performer in my rack, and you absolutely need to go treat yourself, buy one of these, and you will thank me. Next is the Chaos Devices Odessa 1975 Variable Spectrum Harmonic Cluster Oscillator. I'll also be talking about the expander, which I definitely recommend you pick up if you're considering getting an Odessa. The expander is called HEL, H-E-L, and it allows the Odessa to work polyphonically, and it's really a big addition for a small extra price. When I heard some demos of Odessa, I was really interested in picking one up. It's got some really, really nice, I can't describe the sounds. I guess they can be kind of rubbery, they can be metallic, they can be shiny, they can sound like a very hard-cut, filtered, rich waveform. It does phasing, and it's really a beautiful instrument. Now, I have a couple of nitpicks with it. One is what I believe is a design flaw / missed opportunity. There is an output for just the fundamental on the oscillator, and then there's an output for even and an output for odd harmonics. But you can't get rid of the fundamental in those two outputs for the even and odd harmonics, which doesn't make sense to me, because a lot of the time I'm using it, I don't want the fundamental in there. I just want the rich harmonics. And if there's already a separate output for the fundamental, it's much easier to mix it back in with the other outputs, as opposed to trying to find a way to clip it out of the signal if you don't want it. So there's been some discussion about this online, where people take the fundamental, they invert it and mix it back into the signal, and it cancels out the fundamental, theoretically, from those other two outputs. But in practice, it never quite works. It can lessen, of course, it can make it much softer, but it's still sometimes a little intrusive. So it's a little bit of a nitpick. It's not a reason to not buy this oscillator if you like the sound. So for the last oscillator, I've saved this one for last because it is the absolute star of the show in my modular. And that is the 4MS Ensemble Oscillator. This is billed as a unified polyphonic voice of 16 complex oscillators. Now, if you've heard a little bit about this or heard some discussion about it, you may pick up on sentiment that it's only good for organ sounds, but those people are wrong. Trust me on this, they're wrong. There's so much shaping of the sound. Just talking on timbre alone, the amount and types of shaping you can do, especially with the external CV, it's amazing. And on top of that, you do have a potential for harmony. Of course, you can do chords and pandiatonic washes or the like. You can also use it more like an additive synthesizer and think of notes as partials rather than melodic content. So it sort of fits that line somewhere between the idea of harmony and timbre, and that's extraordinary, especially considering you can define any scale you want. It doesn't have to be 12 tet. It doesn't have to repeat every octave. You can just make clusters of notes and ride those. And it's so playable. It's so playable. So many of the melodies in my patches, so many of them are Ensemble Oscillator. This is absolute star, and go listen to some demos out there. You should do that. So thanks for sticking it out, and hopefully we'll get to part 3. I'm not sure what category that will be yet. I'll take requests, but take care of yourselves out there, and I will see you later.